Welcome to STARS Launch Pod, where we chat with innovators who are overcoming challenges, pushing boundaries, and collaborating to make space more accessible and sustainable for humanity, one launch at a time.
It's one small step for man.
Here's your host, Susan Wise.
Hi, and welcome to STARS Launch Pod, space technology and research sciences, brought to you by starsciences.org, where we connect, collaborate, and accelerate. I'm your host, Susan Wise, and honored to have with us today Douglas Jerolmack, professor of Earth and Environmental Science and Mechanical Engineering and Applied Mechanics. Hi, Douglas. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I tell you, we'd like to hear a little bit more about what you're doing right now and also what you're currently doing to further the space industry.
Sure. So I should say briefly that I'm a geophysicist and most of my research is grounded here on planet Earth. We do a lot of experiments and some field work, but I don't discriminate among planets in terms of interest. So I like to say that, I do a lot of work on planet Earth because it's right in front of me. And it's a little harder to do work further out, but when there's fascinating patterns and landscapes on other planets, then we go for that. And so current projects we're working on that are planetary related outside of Earth, there are two projects that are funded by NASA. One of them is this LASSIE project. And one of our goals, I should say, is our team of proponents for getting robots with legs on other planets.
Yes, I've seen those.
Yeah.
Those are so cool, like little puppies.
Yeah, that's right. They're little robot dogs. And of course,
Yeah.
wheels are great. They go great on firm, flat terrain, and you can put heavy stuff on wheeled platforms. And this is why all of the rovers that we put on other planets have wheels. But the moment that you encounter loose soil or even slightly steep slopes, the engineers are screaming, stay away, stay away, stay away, right? And so you can't go to all these scientifically interesting areas. And of course, we're also interested, when I say we, I mean humans are interested in returning to the moon and even, developing
Mars.
on the moon and then eventually
Right.
Mars. And for us, that also then means that we're going to have to move across, understand, and manipulate this foreign soil. And so if we have these robots with legs, first of all, they can climb steep slopes and move through loose soil without getting stuck like you and I can, and like dogs can. And they can act as scouts, maybe to tell the astronauts where we could put a road or where we could have wheeled rovers come later. The other thing, though, the big idea is that like our hands and feet, the legs on a legged robot are sensors themselves, meaning they can feel how strong or how weak the soil is. And so the premise is that you have a robot that has legs and it can carry instruments on its back like other rovers can, but the robot itself is also an instrument. That these legs, as they move into the soil, we can measure the force that's pushing back on the legs, and we can actually learn how weak or strong, how sticky or frictional.
Squishy.
Yeah, and
Right.
sticky and all
Yeah.
of that. And so that's one of our major projects that we're working on, is to demonstrate that leg robots can not only get us access to hard to access areas, but can also themselves be scientific instruments to learn about lunar soil. So that project is called the LASSIE project. And then it has
Of course, the Lassie. Now I get
because of the
it.
dog, you got it.
Okay.
And it has a sister project called TRUSSES, where we're envisioning that there are teams of robots. Some of them have wheels, some of them have legs. And the question is, if we want humans and robots to efficiently explore environments on the moon or on Mars, how do we deploy different types of combinations of robots and humans in order to do that the best? And so we're interested in whether or not teams of robots can operate separately, but then come together and pull one another out of a sand trap or out of a jam when they get stuck.
Oh, wow.
And so there's a lot of
Okay.
technological development in that. And then there's also, where I come in, is always related to the physics or the mechanics of the soil itself and the way that that comes into play in these problems. So those are two major projects that are funded by NASA that we're working on.
Do you get to play actually with soil from the moon?
No, so the quantities that we need are large. They're too large for us to dare to request, some of these
Okay.
precious samples that came from Apollo. So one thing that's pretty common is that there's this lunar regolith simulant. There are a few different kinds. but basically places like the Johnson Space Center, you know, people analyze the soil that was brought back from Apollo missions, and then they realize we want to experiment with this soil, but we don't have enough of it. And so what they do is they grind up a bunch of volcanic minerals and other rocks and trying to recreate a synthetic, you know, soil that is like the lunar soil. And then they
So it's
sell
like
it.
the same consistency and same.
Same range
Okay.
of particle sizes, same
Mm-hmm.
consistency, same amount of like big granular stuff and small sticky dust, very abrasive angular dust like you have on
Mm-hmm.
the moon. And so we use that material. But then because we're interested in how the material itself affects all of this robots being able to walk and drive, we use the lunar simulate, but we also use perfectly spherical glass beads, and we also use beach sand, and we also use mud. So, right, because we'll use actually a lot of different materials so that we can try to understand how the consistency of the material determines, you know, the robot's walking.
That way you're ready for anything,
Yeah.
any environment,
That's
you
the
know,
hope.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. What has been one of your biggest aha moments?
So, you know, one of them related to those projects in particular that I was just talking about, you know, this collaboration started a long time ago, and it took a long time to come to fruition, right? But what happened was there's this robotics professor, Dan Kodacek, here at Penn, and he reached out to me probably in 2014 or 2013, and they had been working on leg robots for a long time. I didn't know anything about them. I had seen them around campus a few times, but I never,
Yeah.
it was just as a spectator, right? I didn't
Yeah.
work with them. And he approached me because he said, hey, we have these legged robots and we're interested in doing science with them. And we think that maybe, you know, they're really good at climbing steep slopes and loose sand. Maybe we could do desert science, right? So he approached me saying, I understand you work on sand dunes on Earth and other places. What do you think do you think that this robot would be useful to do desert science somehow? And he was thinking like it would carry a payload, have instruments on it. And
Mhm.
I said to him, well, you know, that would be convenient, I guess, but that would just be doing something that like me or my grad students can do already, right? And what I wanted to know was there be something that this robot could do that would be just brand new? And the aha moment came because as I was going back and forth to understand why they use these legs instead of wheels and how they work, it's going to get a little technical for a second, but hopefully there's a payoff for us, which is that, you know, he was explaining to me how the robot leg works and the mechanics of it, right? And I was learning that there's no gears. Like a car has gears, and friction. There's a lot that separates like the motor in your car from the wheels that are spinning on the road, right? There's a lot of different connectors. And these robot legs are direct drive, which means that the motor moves and the leg moves. And what I realized was that the voltage in the motor is measuring the force of the ground, meaning when the ground is soft, you know, the robot struggles more and it needs more power to drive the motor. And what the aha moment was, wait, so the motor can tell us science, like that we can use the motor as an instrument, that we can measure the resistance of the soil to walking in it using the motor itself. And we're like, the robot can be the instrument, right? So that was the aha moment. But it turns out that, you know, we started working and everything that makes the legs better, more sensitive for doing science, makes them worse for walking. So that's been
Great.
there's always a science engineering tension, right? And here was that the scientist like me wants us to have more and more sensitivity, but the modifications we did for that accidentally, but maybe predictably, always made walking worse. So it took us like 10 years or more to get to the point where the walking robot was doing science grade measurements.
So was that one of your biggest challenges
I would say
and overcoming that, or would it be something else?
that was one of the biggest technical challenges for sure. Yeah, because
'Cause it's good on one hand, but not,
yeah, that's right. Because you know, when you think about it, you know, there's some boring but very important logistical aspects of what I'm telling you, right? So
Mhm.
let's say that 11 years ago we have this discovery in a conversation. So we have to work on this problem. We have to get money. We have to recruit people with training. There have to be people at the interface of like robotics and geo or planetary science. And then they do their work with us, maybe 3 years as a postdoc or 5 years as a PhD student, and they make one important but incremental step, and the money runs out and they leave, and it's harder than we thought, and we haven't gotten there, right? So we can't
Right.
go back to the same funders. And so there's this thing where, when you say that there's a 10 or 12-year technical problem, people say, oh, that sounds hard, but they stuck with it. But like sticking with it actually is that you have to keep spinning new, smaller problems that are funding worthy so we got recalibrated to how difficult this would be. And then we had to break it into a series of smaller problems, but that were still worthy and attractive for funding, and that would
Right.
still launch careers for the scientists and engineers that worked on them, even if they didn't get the big payoff. And so
Wow.
that's both a super hard challenge for us technically, but also just to keep momentum going and to keep the funding going in order to, to cross the finish line. But now we can brag a little bit, but whenever we take this robot, it's producing these measurements, and our collaborators at NASA are super excited about the possibility. And I don't know how long it will take to get a legged robot on another planetary body, but I do feel we've now made a substantive contribution toward that, because we've really demonstrated the payoff in terms of the scientific understanding that you can get, and also the accessibility. So, we go to White Sands, New Mexico, where there's steep sand dunes that we can walk up.
I was going to ask you, because we used to go sledding on the sand dunes in West Texas.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. I mean,
Yep.
you go fast.
That's right. That's right. And so we've demonstrated that we can climb those dunes, and we can also understand that the sand is loose there. And the moment that you crest the dune and go to the other side, the sand is a lot tighter and stronger. And we see that directly. And we've actually even just recently on our last white sand strip demonstrated a leg robot walked around and it made a hazard map. It said, these places are loose and hazardous, and this ribbon that we found is strong. And then we sent a wheeled
Oh.
rover, and the wheeled rover went in the safe zone and didn't get stuck. And then we sent it into the zone that was flagged as hazardous by the walking robot, and
That's
the wheeled
amazing.
robot got stuck. And so we're
Because
demonstrating that we can actually use these teams of robots together.
just trying to climb those sand dunes, we would start sinking. I mean, sometimes it was really soft.
Yeah.
And you're like, I mean, it took everything to get up to the top before you could slide down.
That's
So
right. And
I
so-
get that. That's interesting.
And so if you think about what your feet are doing when you try to climb that sand dune, right? So you first go and you're just pushing down like you would on the land. And then you realize
Yeah.
that's not working. So you kick in a little bit, and maybe even, you kick up, right? And you're basically experimenting, moving your foot around until you find some place where you gain purchase. So the leg robots can do the same thing, right? They can actually
That's so
step
cool.
down, but then that triggers a little avalanche, and that's not good. So then they can push their foot further into the dune in order to, gain some traction.
And they're learning this as they're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
That is so cool. All right, Doug, what would be one piece of advice that you'd like to share with our listeners?
One. Yeah.
Uh,
So, there's a lot of things about persistence, and science is basically failure. There's all those things. I think they're super important, but they're pretty common. I think maybe zooming out from that, it's that science is an extraordinarily human endeavor. And like pretty much any job at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. And I think that we don't think about nurturing the relationships with these longtime collaborators, where in order for you to make it through these even decade of failure, that it doesn't cut it to just say that we're persistent. You need, the kind of encouragement, the kind of interpersonal skills, the kind of openness to being vulnerable and like sharing struggle, and even like being intentional about camaraderie and community, I find is absolutely essential for the longevity of these collaborations. And so I think that there's an aspect of just, it sounds cheesy, people say this, but like all of us bringing our full selves to work, understanding that we put a lot of value on our identity as scientists and engineers, and we bring then a lot of, it's very personal when things succeed or fail. And I think then for me, in terms of, leadership now that I have a research group and collaborations that I've led, is just paying a lot of attention and being intentional about nurturing these relationships and really taking the time to celebrate the successes. And then also, like, it sounds a little extreme, but grieving the failures. Like when my grad students have stuff that after 3 years didn't work, and I'm like, it's okay to not only say
Yeah.
this is sad, like to really grieve, like I spent all that time and I thought I was close and then it didn't happen.
Mhm.
And so there's that aspect. And then when you allow yourself to build collaborations by nurturing these relationships, it also takes you in unexpected directions scientifically, because if you start to recognize the human component and then you really prioritize connecting with people because of their openness and because of their interest in these human connections, then you can find common common ground scientifically that could be completely unexpected. And so you come in, I had, maybe when I started doing science, a very rigid idea of what I was going to work on and how I was going to do it. And when I started prioritizing relationships, I started moving into completely unexpected directions, because I said, I want to work with people who really care, and with people who really have a joy in what they're doing, and with people who are super curious over any particular scientific goal that I have. And I just moved in so many unexpected directions.
Happily, that's what Stars Launch Pod is. That's the core of what we are about.
Right?
To
Yeah.
connect and collaborate and accelerate all of this, and by letting people come together and share their experiences and learn about each other and what you're doing. I think that's awesome. I love that, Doug. Before we wrap up, let me ask you, do you have a past or maybe present passion project you
Yeah.
want to talk about?
I'll briefly mention two kind of quirky ones, right? Because you said passion
Okay.
projects, so I kind of think quirky, right? So one is space or planetary related. And it's this work that, with a collaborator, Gabor Demokos in Hungary, and a PhD student that works with me, Sophie Silver. But it's this idea that we've been looking at crack patterns across the solar system, basically anywhere where there's images of a planetary surface, from a rover on the ground looking at mud cracks on Mars to entire planetary scale cracks like Earth's tectonic plates, or what you see on Enceladus and Europa. And we've been working on characterizing the geometry of these crack networks, the way that the cracks meet and join together. And we've basically found that nature has preferences in the way that cracks come together. So if you measure the geometry of these crack patterns, you find out that they're not uniformly distributed, that there's clustered kind of patterns. And the tantalizing thing I'll tell you is that it seems like when water is involved, you can see the signature of it in the geometry of the crack network. So one passion project for us has been showing that you could just give me a trace of cracks, that you take an image and you trace them on a piece of paper and just hand me the trace, and I could tell you whether water was involved or not in making those cracks.
Really?
Because
That's cool.
mud cracks that involve water are special, and ice
Mhm.
cracks are special because the cracks actually heal. And the healing and
Oh.
recracking and healing and recracking actually makes the geometry different. Another really weird, fun project that we worked on that got a little bit of press last year was this baseball rubbing mud. So there's this rubbing mud.
Did you
in
put on a
Major League
base
Baseball.
when you're pitching?
Yeah. And
Okay.
there's this rubbing mud that's been used for 90 years in Major League Baseball. And it's the
All right.
only material that is sanctioned by Major League Baseball to be rubbed on a ball to give it grip. And it is harvested by a family from a secret location in South New Jersey. And it's harvested from a river, a tidal river, and they won't tell anyone where it is. And Major League Baseball has been using this, but they want to replace it because they don't know if it's been consistent through time. And
Right.
the family won't tell them where it comes from.
They don't really know what it is.
Right. And so Major League Baseball wants to replace it, and they keep trying with synthetics, but they keep failing. And so we just bought some of this rubbing mud from the family, like off the internet, like anyone can. And we subjected it to a bunch of mechanical tests, and we measured its composition, and we figured out how it works. But in figuring out how it works, and we published a paper on it, but we also realized that it would be incredibly difficult to synthesize anything that would
Really?
reproduce what this mud does. And so it was a scientific paper that said how the mud works, but it also came with a recommendation from us, which is don't try and replace it. That it would be very hard to do this synthetically, And it's a natural material that's replenished with the tides, and it takes a very little bit of it to have a great effect. And so you have a sustainable material that does exactly what we want it to do. Don't change it.
Good for that family.
Yeah.
Keep that business in the family.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Learned something new about but baseball.
Yep.
Who'd have thought? I love it. Douglas, thank you so much for joining us today. Really do appreciate
Yeah.
you coming on and sharing your story. And we'd love to hear back from you again in the future and find out all the fun things you're doing.
Sure, anytime. And thank you so much. These are great questions. It's been a great talk.
All right. Douglas Jerolmack, professor of Earth and Environmental Science and Mechanical Engineering and Applied Mechanics.
At University
so
of
much.
Pennsylvania.
There you go.
Yep.
Got to get that in there.
Yep.
All right. Be sure to join us where we connect, collaborate, and accelerate. And we'd like to invite you to join starsciences.org to receive a free one-year membership. Just enter the promo code FRIENDS321. That's FRIENDS321. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review, subscribe, and until next time, keep looking up.
Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. Watch us on YouTube and follow us on social media. Stars Launch Pod, propelling us forward, one launch at a time.